Hello. Currently, everyone on the internet is talking about 90s minimalism and Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, and it's mostly because that new show just came out, Love Story, which is about like her and JFK Jr.'s love story. And although I haven't watched the show, I have seen many TikTok edits, so I feel like I really have a grasp of, the story. But what I mostly want to talk about is fashion, because she is very much a fashion icon. I've known about her for a few years, and with this show coming out, there's this like renewed interest and focus on 90s minimalism, which I think is really interesting. Like every few years, her and like this idea of 90s minimalism pops up on social media. I remember a few years ago people were talking about like elevated basics. It's this style that's always coming back into trend. So I want to like have a deep dive and look into what is so interesting and alluring about it. Which brings us to part one. What is 90s minimalism? I think before we can talk about the 90s, we need to talk about the 80s. The 80s was bold and colorful, with big shoulders and lots of maximalism. Fashion is cyclical, and often when there's a phase of maximalism, it will be followed by minimalism. I would argue we are in quite a conservative minimalist phase right now, especially if we take the whole clean girl aesthetic into consideration. And it's also important to look at what was happening at the time, as I'm also a firm believer that fashion, like any art form, is inherently political. The 80s was characterized by right-wing movements. You had Thatcher in the UK and Reagan in the US. There was the AIDS epidemic, fear surrounding global warming, multiple wars, and overall a lot of social and cultural polarization. So when the Berlin Wall fell in 1989 and the 90s started, it led to a lot of cultural change. The Cold War had ended, there was more peace, and a lot of technological inventions and advancements were taking place. For example, the internet became mainstream in the 90s. There was still a lot of polarization, don't get me wrong, but the overall vibe was a lot more optimistic, especially nearing the end of the decade. And it makes sense that because of that, people were dressing in a way that took life seriously. I would say that 90s fashion can be defined by like three different styles. You had grunge as inspired by rock and punk, You had grunge as inspired by rock and punk, minimalism as worn by young professionals, and streetwear rooted in black culture and hip hop. Streetwear has very much become its own part of modern day fashion. Grunge cycles in and out. I feel like we saw that in like 2014, 2015, like on Tumblr in the self-scrunch aesthetic. And minimalism is kind of always there, but it does ebb and flow in popularity. And when I say 90s minimalism, there's a few brands that come to mind. There's Calvin Klein, where Carolyn Bessette worked, Helmut Lang, and also Prada. The last one might surprise those who aren't familiar with past Prada and only know more recent years, but 90s Prada was so special because Miuccia really leaned into anti-fashion by championing ugly chic. Like the iconic feminist she is, she decided that the clothing didn't need to be sexy or flattering, and she was truly just designing for the working woman who had bigger things on her mind than looking hot at work. I actually have this book. I have this book about Prada and Schiaparelli, Elsa and Miuccia, and there's a quote in it that I think is really relevant to this. There's always a subtle clue, something odd or off-kilter about her neat little skirt and her tailored shirt buttoned at the collar, but it isn't her virtue that's a lie, it's her passivity. Prada style is often described as postmodern, but it isn't anxious enough. And also this book, really cool. Like there's so much photography, like really interesting photos. Oh my god, perfect. Ugly chic. I open it on the exact right page, love that. I think this lack of anxiety is a defining factor of 90s minimalism. It's a more peaceful time period. People are opting for clean lines, neutral colors, and there's a real like less is more attitude. Getting dressed is easy. It's not that people aren't trying with fashion, but more so that people do a lot of the work while shopping. Which brings me to the second part, quality. Everyone knows that the quality of today's clothing sucks. We are paying more and more money for worse materials and worse construction, and this is mostly possible because people are not aware or informed about what good quality actually is. In the 90s, however, I would argue people were informed because overall people bought less clothing, so each purchase actually mattered a lot more in the long run. When we look at 90s minimalism and then we compare it to today's interpretation of it, there are many obvious differences. Take for example a slip dress. A lot of slip dresses today are polyester, probably finished on an overlocker and cut on straight grain, whereas in the 90s it would most likely be made from silk, finished with a French seam, and cut on the bias. That just makes a huge difference, not only in the way that it looks on the body, but also in the way that it feels to wear it, and how it will affect your relationship with the garment in the long run. I remember this one tweet, I think, or maybe it was on Threads or something, but it was two photos, one of like a really high quality silk bias cut skirt and the other of like a polyester straight grain cut skirt, and people were saying that the arguably like objectively worse quality one looked better, which is so interesting because it just shows that people can't even tell what good quality is, but they're so used to seeing bad quality that that has become good to them, and that has become like the way that something is supposed to look to them. But anyway, for the 90s I could say the same for knitwear, especially knowing that Carolyn Bessette works in fashion. Her knitwear was most likely 100% wool or 100% cashmere, her denim 100% cotton, her leather real. She also wore her pieces and let them age, and she was often photographed wearing the same things. She and almost everyone in the 90s was buying clothing to last them for years. I think a lot of people's obsession with 90s minimalism unknowingly comes from a quality aspect, where we see those photos and we go, oh, my jeans don't look like that. And yeah, they don't, because they're made in a completely different way. And it's difficult to find things that look like that because the market has changed so much. And what is available to you is completely different. Nowadays, you have far more choice when it comes to buying items, but that also means that brands are simultaneously slacking off as they see other brands get away with cutting corners and cutting costs. Whereas in the past, there was less choice and brands were trying to outdo each other, outperform each other. They were trying to actually compete to create the best product in order to get business. Whereas now, they just compete for the most profit, but they're not really competing in a way to try and get the best product anymore. To kind of sum that up, back then, brands were competing with each other to your benefit. And now they've stopped because they know that the bad quality clothing will be bought anyway. All right, part 3, dressing for life versus dressing for the internet. We are essentially living in a panopticon today, and I think that really affects fashion. There has always been occasion dressing. People would wear one outfit to work, one to hang out with friends, one to a party, one to exercise. That's normal. That's completely normal. But with the rise of social media, this other space has arisen, which is dressing for the internet. And the tricky thing about that is that the internet is everywhere. Getting dressed up to take photos for your Instagram is one thing, but daily OOTDs or daily mirror selfies have brought the internet into every outfit really. So every outfit is for the internet, essentially. If you are documenting your life, posting on social media, posting stories, especially like posting stories, posting daily things, you are partially dressing for the internet on top of dressing for the occasions that you are actually attending. And social media wasn't a thing in the 90s. Hence, people got dressed for life. They weren't thinking about that outfit being photographed. They were just thinking like, oh, it's cold today, let me wear my thick wool sweater. Or, oh, I'm going to the gym, let me wear my working out outfit. Like, it was for the occasion, not for the internet. And it's also much easier to get dressed when you just look at the weather and pick up your trusty high quality pieces and think to yourself, yeah, that will work. And that doesn't mean you can't have fun with fashion. You can throw in some color or texture or a fun print like Carolyn Bessette did all the time. I'm mostly just saying this because I don't think we fully grasp how much the internet is influencing style. Even the concept of a micro trend is so funny to me, and some of the outfits I see online, although cool, are so impractical to the point where I know it's just put on to take photos, yet it will still end up on people's mood boards for everyday style. To conclude, the combination of quality and dressing for life is what makes 90s minimalism really timeless. You can wear any of those pieces today easily, which is why it's still so relevant and inspiring. Yet it is difficult to actually find those pieces today, especially the level of quality without paying a premium price or having to scour the internet for like a niche brand that has specialized in like one particular style of shirts and does it really, really well. Sorry, I don't know why I focus on that. And mostly like what was timeless then is still timeless now. But what is considered like timeless now, I fear it won't be around long enough to actually be timeless in 10 years. So it really becomes this vibe that we love and admire, but yet we can't really attain it. Anyway, that was the video. Those were kind of my thoughts on why 90s minimalism is so prevalent and why it is so interesting and why it keeps popping up in fashion discourse. And it was a really special time, like especially Helmut Lang, you know, they've tried to revive that brand so many times and it's not working. And I think it's not working because, you know, it's just a completely different world. And I think all the things kind of aligned for that fashion to happen and work in the 90s, where now it just doesn't. But yeah, those were my thoughts. Thank you for watching. This is like my first sit down video. I feel like I looked at my laptop a lot, so sorry. But also, if you made it this far, thanks. And I might do more. I'm not yet sure what I'm exactly doing with this channel, but I am experimenting and having fun. So, bye!